As BCBAs, we know that sometimes the intake process for new learners can seem to take forever. But individuals need to get started with programming as soon as possible so that they can make real progress. So, how can we streamline the intake process so that it doesn't consist of hours and hours of assessments?
Hi, I'm Shira.
And I'm Shayna.
We're behavior analysts who create weekly content about how to teach kids with autism so that they make real progress. And we create shareable resources to make your job just a little easier. Today's topic is all about the intake process. And if you want more videos like this, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on new video releases.
So, this might be a weird analogy, but I think back to when I was dating and I had this whole checklist in my head of, okay, this is what I want in somebody. I need, this, and this. And, somebody can check off all of those things on paper and I get really excited. And then I meet them in person. And I'm like, oh, this isn't a great match. Or vice versa. You look at somebody on paper and you're like, okay, half of these things are okay, but then you meet them in person and there's a real connection there. That can be similar to an intake process. Sort of, kind of?
Yeah, I think it's similar because what things seem like on paper are not always what they are in person. And we can't look at assessments and intake as a lot of paperwork and forms and boxes to be checked. We have to look at it from a place of clinical judgment and relationship building. We do have another video on the different ABA assessments, so go check that one out. There are a lot of different ABA assessments, and there's definitely value in them. But the process of first starting with an assessment, filling out and testing a client on all of those boxes on an assessment before ever really getting to know them is not one that we recommend.
We talk so much about pairing and about relationship building and just establishing trust when we're teaching somebody that, to me, it doesn't make sense to go in right away when you don't know a learner doesn't know you. It might have a history of hating specific ways of teaching, and you're going in and placing demand right from the beginning so that you can check off boxes on an assessment. It doesn't equate. So everything that we're telling you, like, oh, build trust, build a relationship, but go in and do an assessment right away, and you've got to place all this demand, it doesn't make sense.
Also, it doesn't come across very compassionately or positively to the parent or the caregiver who's involved. Having somebody they don't know come in with books and computers and is like testing their child. And sometimes the assessments don't look so positive, right? Our kids are not always able to show their skill if they don't know you, or maybe they don't have that skill yet. And so your first interaction with the parent and with that child is not a positive one, and one where you're constantly interacting with ways that they're not successful. And I think that we should flip that, in that one of our first few interactions with the parent and with the child should be relationship building, should be positive, should be focusing on what their interests are and what they're good at. So what does that look like?
As a behavior analyst, we're taught, well, we have to do an assessment first. We need to guide programming based on testing. So we have to have something to do in our sessions, or it's not ABA. So we've streamlined the intake process so that, we're hoping that it's a bit more user-friendly. We're hoping that we can be, still doing some type of mini assessment. It might not be, a full ABLS assessment or a full VB MAP assessment, but it is something to get us started in ABA. So what does that look like? In fact, we're doing it. I wish this could be answered in a 3-minute sentence or, a 20-minute podcast, but really in reality, we are doing workshops upon workshops upon workshops on this. Our first one is going to be at ABAI in May. If you're in Philadelphia, on May 24th, it's a Thursday night. We're doing a 3-hour process all about our intake process and assessment piece and what that looks like. But then in June, we're actually kicking off a series of CEUs that we're going to be doing. And in June, on June 20th, actually, the first one is going to be all about our intake assessment. And then in July, we're going to go further into, well, now that we've done the intake assessment, how do we actually do programming for a newer learner and how do we get that going? And then in August, we're going to be talking about, more on that topic and how are we tweaking our assessments and individualizing them and on and on and on, really about taking people from the intake process all the way through an assessment process to program writing and then to analyzing and measuring progress and tweaking that progress to really make successful change.
And the reason we do it differently is because we don't think that programs should be taken from an assessment. You don't need to have a full 100% accurate assessment in order to build programs. The assessment can be there as a guide, and we definitely fill in something like an ABLS or a BB-MAP at some point, but it should never be the comprehensive resource for all of your programming. And we really emphasize building that clinical judgment piece in choosing programs with some assessment and intake information as a support.
So how do we start? We've pretty much streamlined the intake process to about 30 minutes, which is huge considering, some people take months and months of assessment before they're really able to, plan for a student, and we want to get started right away. So, the very first step, without going into too much detail because it's a podcast, is that we really just informally play with the student. We're really informally playing, trying to understand what types of things that person likes, whether they're interested in this, whether they're interested in that. Can they stay on task for longer than 20 seconds? Do they like to interact with me? Do they want to get as far away from possible from me? Or do they run to mom? Do they run away from mom? What really does their profile look like?
And even before we do that, I'll say that we have a parent intake form that we'll send to the parents in advance so we can get somewhat of an idea of what their skill is and, most importantly, what they love. So what their reinforcers are, we don't call it reinforcers because parents don't want to know, but we may say, what's their favorite thing? What do they love doing? What are their favorite toys? And then we can bring some of those things to be able to be the fun person who brought the really cool Paw Patrol set. I would say for a beginner learner, 30 minutes is totally all we need because we can see all of those things in 30 minutes. We have this new exciting toy. Do they approach me? Do they use any words in communicating with me? Are they able to do something small, like come and sit down before I show them the toy? There's so much you could do in 30 minutes with the coolest toy that they've ever seen. With an older learner, it might take a little bit longer because some of the things that you're probing may involve more language and more skill. So maybe longer than 30 minutes, but definitely with a beginner learner, you can get so much out of that.
And from that intake assessment, we're really looking at, okay, is this student a beginner learner? And a beginner learner might be older, but a beginner learner really is a learner who, doesn't have a lot of functional communication, really, really early manding if there is even requesting at all. An intermediate learner has some language and some self-help skills. I should probably mention that a beginner learner doesn't really have those self-help skills or independent skills either, whereas an intermediate learner, has some language skills, typically has some independence or self-help skills. And yes, you can be a beginner learner at self-help skills and an intermediate learner at language, or vice versa. And then a more advanced learner is someone who, right in the intake assessment, is like, okay, I've done this before. What do you need me to do? You need me to sit down here and label these flashcards and answer these questions and fill out these worksheets. Sure, I can do all that. And that's, what we would consider an advanced learner.
So our intake assessment is actually divided in that way, where there are checklists that are categorized as beginner, intermediate, and advanced. There can definitely be overlap, but the goal is for us to be able to get a real general profile. What does this student, what are their strengths? For a lot, it's going to be looking at the communication, the self-help, and the behavior. Those are going to be the big areas because those would be the things that we need to start with anyway. And then some of the more complex skills like language and receptive and expressive labels and things like that they may evolve, and we can come to target that in a little bit. But we would get a really good idea of their profile as to where they fall.
So, and once we've got an idea of what their profile is, then we can go through a few things on our assessments just during play. We're not putting huge demands on them, but during play, we can say, okay, so on average, they're staying on task about 20 seconds per activity. That's, a red flag in my mind saying, okay, this kid needs to be taught how to stay on task. The student is grabbing things out of my hand. Okay, that's another cue to go, okay, we really need to teach some functional communication skills, asking for, items that they like, whether that is through a point or whether that's through sign language or whether that's through just even approaching, in a certain way. If it's a more advanced learner, testing out questions, do they answer, who, what, where questions? Okay, sure they do, but do they answer why questions? And, do they, answer when questions? And do they understand, time of day and all of that type of thing? And that's all on our assessment. And so I'm looking at that. And again, through play, mostly or preferred activities, I'm getting a sense of what they know. And it's not going to be 100% accurate. Like I said, they don't know us during the intake assessment. They know that we're hopefully the giver of good things, but they really still, we're a stranger in the room is what we are. And we need to recognize that. So, at the end of that intake assessment, our goal is to say, okay, they've gotten to know us a little bit more. We were the giver of good things. We had a little bit of fun. And, from the general profile, this is where I see their skill strengths and their skill deficits. So let's put together what I call a shell of a program. And we've put together a shell of a program based on this intake assessment. And then what we can do is, during their first couple sessions, we can start to baseline that a lot more. So the first few sessions are working on pairing and really getting to know the student, in addition to taking some of those skills that we identified in the intake process and saying, okay, let's get a really better sense of what specifically related to this. How do you learn? Do you learn best through imitation? Do you learn best through visuals? Do you learn through skills broken down into really small components, or do you learn more from whole language perspective in sentences, and then breaking it down from there? So that comes later on and not necessarily right from the very beginning. And then once you've known a student for a while, and this could be a while, could be 5 sessions, or it could be a month, it could be a couple months. Once you've established that relationship, then you can go into more formal assessments.
And the skills on our intake assessment are not sequential. They don't have to master one before moving on to another. It's kind of like a list of skills. And that's where your judgment comes in collecting parent goals. Even if you haven't seen it, if the parent tells you that they're really struggling with dressing, and it's really hard to get them dressed in the morning without needing to see it, that could be a priority, and you could work on that. Also, even if in the 30 minutes or the hour, you don't see much because, you couldn't really get much interaction, or the child was upset, or they were, not willing to come close, or that tells you a lot too, because then you could really work on the relationship building and the comfort, and you're not going to definitely start with, flashcards and demands. So there's really so much information that you can collect without the testing right away and the probing of hundreds of skills.
And, that assessment is fairly general, like Shira mentioned, and it doesn't go into, tax 50 items and receptively identifies this. And, it really just says verbs. And it's really just a cue for you as a tester to say, okay, can they match verbs? Can they identify? Can they do it on themselves? Can they do it in pictures? And, can they label things? So it's on you as, the assessor on the BCBA to, really extrapolate that information. But again, it's just a real general guide of, okay, here's in general what they know, and then I can test further later.
And it's definitely a skill, like you're saying, on us as the assessor. It's not something that's going to be easy to you. Like, you have to, if you're going to start doing something like this, it takes a lot of time and practice to know what you're looking for, which is why we're going a lot more in depth over the next few months as to how we do this and what we're looking for. It's kind of understanding the programming piece and working backwards, so that if you know the kinds of programs you're going to be running, that's how you kind of like look at it in your intake assessment. But it is really a skill. And I think the better that you can get at this skill, the better clinical judgment you'll have in all areas. And so it's really important.
So come see us in Philadelphia. If you're around, sign up. It's the Thursday night from 4 till 7 of ABAI. Come see us, or better yet, join our CEU in June, and we'll go through all of this information. And then again, we'll do it more of it and extend it in July and August as well, so that people are really confident by the end of this series of CEUs to be able to implement this themselves.
For more information on the intake process, click the link on or around this video or in the description to join our next live CEU event. We also encourage you to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos, and leave a like and comment below if you have further questions.